My name is Naomi Ellers, and I'm 36 years old. If you had met me just a few weeks ago, you probably would have thought I led a quiet, predictable life, maybe even a boring one. But I was content. I worked as a museum archivist in the city of Ravensshore, a job I'd held since my 20s. I've always loved preserving history, dusty letters, faded photographs, forgotten artifacts. They made sense to me. They didn't change. People, on the other hand, people could shatter you. I lived in a modest two-bedroom house on the outskirts of town with my husband Darren and our son Eli, who had just turned 13. Darren worked in automobile engineering, spending most of his time on test sites or buried in design specs. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We'd had our share of quiet standoffs and unspoken disappointments, but we made it work. We kept things stable, especially for Eli. He was the center of my world. Curious, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic. The kind of kid who read mystery novels and asked questions like, why do some people lie just to hurt others? I'd always answer carefully, never imagining he'd soon be forced to experience those answers in the most brutal way. It was a warm Tuesday morning in May. The kind where the sun dances through the windows and makes everything feel just a little softer. I was in the archives restoration room, gently cleaning a torn 1914 expedition map when my phone buzzed against the steel table. The screen flashed. Darren. He almost never called during the day. Not unless it was serious. I answered immediately. Everything okay? His voice was low and tense. My mom wants us at the estate tonight. She says it's important. Immediately, my stomach turned cold. By mom, he meant Vivian Halston, his mother. A woman with the charm of a diplomat and the heart of a guillotine. In the 14 years I'd been married to her son, Vivian had made one thing perfectly clear. I was an outsider in the Halston family. A tolerated inconvenience. I'll head there after I pick up Eli from school, I replied, already dreading what was coming. But even I couldn't have imagined what Vivian had planned, or how that evening would set off a chain of events that would nearly destroy everything I loved. When my shift ended, I grabbed my bag and headed straight to Ravensshore Middle School. Eli was already waiting outside the main gate, one strap of his backpack hanging loose, hair a little messy from gym class. He gave me a quick wave, but his smile faded as soon as he noticed the tension on my face. You okay, Mom? He asked as he slid into the passenger seat. I gave him a tired smile. We have to make a stop before going home. Where to? I sighed and kept my eyes on the road. Your grandmother's estate. Eli groaned. Ugh. Why? I didn't answer right away. How could I explain that Vivian never really wanted him around? That she once told Darren, right in front of me, that boy's being raised on dusty books and secondhand values. Don't expect him to carry the Halston name with pride. Instead, I simply said, she asked to see us. Something about an important family matter. The rest of the drive was silent. When we arrived at the gates of the Halston estate, I felt my throat tighten. The mansion beyond the iron bars looked more like a historical landmark than a home. 3 stories of cold stone, tall windows, and pointed gables. Perfect and distant. Just like Vivian. As the gates swung open, Eli muttered under his breath, please don't let Aunt Simone be there. No such luck. A sleek gray sports car was already parked in the circular driveway, Simone's. Darren's younger sister, 33, and endlessly polished. She worked in luxury event planning and made sure everyone knew it. Simone could spot a wrinkle from 10 feet away and wouldn't hesitate to mention it. She and Vivian were 2 halves of the same blade. As I parked behind her car, I turned to Eli and gave his hand a squeeze. We'll be in and out. Just stay close. We hadn't even made it up the stone steps when the front door flew open. Simone stood there, dressed in a high-collar designer coat and silk gloves, her arms folded. Well, she said with a smirk, the museum crew has arrived. I ignored her jab. Good to see you too, Simone. Eli said nothing, his eyes already on the floor. We stepped inside, and as always, the air inside the Halston mansion felt colder than outside. The smell of polished wood and antique fabric clung to everything. Paintings of unsmiling ancestors lined the hallway like silent judges. Simone led us to the drawing room, where Vivian sat with the same commanding grace she always wore like armor. Darren was already there, seated on the edge of a couch, his hands clasped and expression unreadable. Vivian barely looked up. "You're late." "I came straight from work," I said calmly. She gave a dismissive sniff. "Restoring dusty maps, I assume?" Eli shifted uncomfortably beside me. Also in the room was Grant, Simone's fiancé. Tall, quiet, and perpetually looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'd always gotten the sense he didn't fully belong in this world either. Then, without a word, Vivian reached forward and opened a velvet-covered box that sat on the glass coffee table. Inside was a breathtaking emerald choker necklace, glowing green stones surrounded by antique gold, the kind of piece you'd expect to see under glass in a museum. "This," Vivian said coolly, "is the Halston heirloom." She let the words float in the air like incense. "It has been in the family for 5 generations, passed down to be worn by the women of the Halston line on the most significant of occasions." Simone leaned in with a pleased little smile. "It's worth at least $150,000. I'll be wearing it at the wedding." There it was. I looked at Darren, but he said nothing. Vivian snapped the box shut and turned to Eli. Her voice sharpened. "This necklace is not a toy, young man. It's not something to be handled by careless hands." Eli froze. I felt his small shoulder stiffen under my palm. I looked her dead in the eye. "Eli respects what isn't his. He doesn't need to be warned like a common thief." Vivian's lips curled ever so slightly. "Temptation, Naomi, is a powerful thing, even for a child." I stared back, jaw tight, heart thudding. This wasn't just about a necklace. It never had been. It was about control. And humiliation. "We'll be at the ceremony tomorrow," I said, turning toward Darren more than anyone else. Simone smirked. "Let's just hope you can find something appropriate to wear. You don't want to make our side of the aisle look underdressed." Without another word, I took Eli's hand and walked out of the mansion. But what we didn't know, what none of us could have guessed, was that necklace Vivian had just paraded before us would soon become a weapon. And my son, he would be the target. The next morning, the city of Ravenshore looked deceptively peaceful, sunlight warming the rooftops, birds flitting through spring air. But I wasn't at peace. My stomach churned as I buttoned Eli's blazer and straightened his collar. He looked handsome in his pale blue shirt and navy jacket, though the crease in his brow told me he was still thinking about what Vivian had said the night before. "Do you think she'll say something again?" he asked softly. I crouched down in front of him and placed my hands on his shoulders. "We keep our heads high, Eli. That's all we need to do." The church where Simone's wedding was being held, St. Agnes Cathedral, was as grand and cold as you'd expect from someone like Vivian. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and gilded columns that made it feel more like a monument than a place of joy. It was a building meant to impress, not to comfort. When we arrived, most of the guests were already inside: city council members, corporate CEOs, charity board chairs. People Vivian had collected like porcelain figurines over the years. Some nodded politely when they saw us. Others didn't even try to hide their indifference. Darren was already seated near the front, his face pale and his shoulders tense. We joined him quietly. Vivian fluttered around the altar area like a general before battle, managing flower arrangements and giving sharp commands to the wedding planner. Simone, we were told, was still getting ready in the bridal suite. Then it happened. A high-pitched scream tore through the cathedral, slicing through the soft classical music and the rustling of silk dresses. "My necklace. It's gone." Everything stopped. Gasps rippled across the pews. Heads turned. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. Darren and I exchanged a stunned glance before we sprang to our feet. Vivian, Grant, and several others bolted toward the bridal suite. Eli gripped my hand as we followed, his fingers trembling in mine. When we pushed into the suite, we found Simone standing in front of an ornate vanity mirror, her makeup half-finished, her eyes wide with panic. She pointed to an empty silk cushion atop the vanity. "I put it right here," she shrieked. "The emerald choker. It's gone. Someone took it." Vivian's face went ashen. "Are you sure?" I'm not blind, Simone snapped. I left it on this table. There was a thick, terrible silence. Then Simone's eyes scanned the room and landed squarely on Eli. That kid, she hissed. He was in here earlier. I saw him by the door. My heart stopped. Eli flinched.
What?
No, I didn't. I wasn't even. He took it. Simone shouted. I know he did. Vivian stepped forward slowly, her voice quiet and cold. Eli, is that true? He looked like someone had poured ice water over his soul. No. I didn't touch anything, but already, whispers filled the room. Isn't his mother the archivist? Someone said under their breath. You know how it is, another whispered. Kids like that, they see something expensive and can't resist. I moved in front of my son. You're accusing a 13-year-old with no proof? This is absurd. Vivian's expression didn't budge. He was close to a piece worth $150,000. Temptation, Naomi. That's all I'm saying. But Simone wasn't finished. Liar, she screamed, lunging forward. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed a heavy porcelain vase from the vanity and smashed it over Eli's head. The crack of ceramic colliding with skull rang through the air. The vase shattered. My son collapsed to the ground, blood blooming across his scalp. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, Simone, Grant bellowed. Darren dropped to his knees beside Eli. What the hell is wrong with you? He roared. I fell beside them, cradling Eli's bloodied head in my lap as his body trembled in pain and shock. I've got you, baby. I'm here, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. We need to call the police. Darren shouted. When no one moved, he yanked out his phone and dialed himself. Yes, this is Darren Halston. My son has just been assaulted. Yes, by my sister-in-law. The attacker is still on site. We need help.
Now.
Simone stood frozen, panting, her face a mix of rage and panic. He took it, she said weakly. He took my necklace. Then Grant's voice cut through like steel. No, he didn't. Everyone turned to face him. What are you saying? Simone snapped. Grant reached into his suit jacket, pulled out his phone, and said, I have the truth, and I'm done protecting your lies. Grant's voice had always been quiet, measured, even. But in that moment, it carried the weight of a courtroom gavel. I wasn't going to say anything, he began, unlocking his phone and tapping through the security app. I figured we could deal with this after the wedding.
But now?
After you assaulted a child? You don't deserve silence. Simone's eyes widened in disbelief. You're joking. Grant ignored her and turned the screen toward us. Watch. On the screen was a black and white video feed with a timestamp from earlier that morning. The cathedral's security camera had captured the inside of the bridal suite. Simone walked into the room alone. She looked around cautiously, then walked to the vanity, opened the necklace box, and slipped the emerald choker into her handbag. Gasps echoed through the room. Simone's face drained of color. Wait, no. That's not. That video is fake. You edited it. But Grant pressed play again. The footage continued. Simone adjusted her veil, glanced in the mirror, and suddenly threw her hands in the air, letting out the same high-pitched scream we had all heard. She staged the theft, Grant said evenly. She planned to file an insurance claim. She's drowning in debt. Her condo is in foreclosure, and she maxed out 3 credit cards this year alone. This was her plan to cover it. And Eli? He looked down at my son, still cradled in my arms. He was just the scapegoat. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Vivian looked stunned, her mouth slightly parted. You're lying, Simone screeched, turning to her mother. Mom, tell them he's lying. You know I'd never. But Vivian didn't move. Simone took a step toward her. Say something. Vivian stared at her daughter. For the first time in my entire relationship with that woman, she looked truly shaken. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unreadable. I said, Simone cried, say something, but Vivian didn't. She remained seated, cold and still. Then came the sound of approaching footsteps. Detective Milo Brandt entered the room with a second officer, their badges visible. A cathedral staff member had apparently let them in, and they'd been listening just outside. "Miss Simone Halston?" Detective Brandt asked, voice steady. Simone turned to him, eyes wild. "Wait, no, you don't understand. That video's a setup. You're under arrest for the assault of a minor, attempted insurance fraud, and filing a false claim," he said, nodding to the second officer. Handcuffs gleamed as the officer stepped forward. "No," Simone shrieked, backing away. "You can't do this. I'm a Halston. You don't know who my mother is." "Irrelevant," Detective Brandt said coolly. "Your last name doesn't excuse a felony." Simone turned desperately toward Grant. "Grant, help me. You're supposed to be on my side." He didn't even look at her. As the officer restrained her wrists, Simone began to scream. "Emma, do something." Vivian remained silent. And then, just as the officers were escorting Simone out of the room, the detective's radio crackled. "Dispatch to Detective Brandt. Come in." He lifted the mic. "Brandt here. We've received confirmation. Vivian Halston is under investigation for tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Please detain her for questioning." The room erupted again, this time in horrified gasps. Vivian stood slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You've made a mistake. I had no part in Simone's situation." "We'll sort that out at the station," Detective Brandt replied. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." As the second officer approached, I saw something change in Vivian's face. That iron grip she always held, the one she used to keep everyone else beneath her, finally cracked. Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second. For the first time in 14 years, she looked afraid. The officers led both women out of the cathedral, past stunned wedding guests, family, and press. Whispers turned to shouts. Phones came out. People took photos, videos. The Halston family, the untouchable, unshakable Halstons, had finally fractured before the public's eyes. And through it all, I held Eli in my arms, whispering to him over and over, "You're safe now. It's over. You're safe." The cathedral, once prepared for celebration, now felt like a courtroom cloaked in stained glass. The floral arrangements wilted in silence, the music had long since died, and the crowd stood in stunned disbelief. Simone and Vivian Halston arrested. The Halston wedding had become headline fodder for every local news outlet in Ravenshore. I sat on the marble floor, cradling Eli in my lap. His blood had dried along his temple and in his hairline, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. He was conscious, dazed, and exhausted. "Is it over?" he whispered, barely audible. "It is now," I said, brushing the hair from his face. Paramedics arrived moments later. Darren never left Eli's side as they examined him, cleaned the wound, and confirmed he'd need stitches but would fully recover. I watched my husband hold our son's hand with quiet devastation. He hadn't stopped the damage, but he was here now. Fully here. When the paramedics loaded Eli onto the stretcher, Darren and I followed them out of the cathedral and into the light. But before we reached the ambulance, someone jogged up behind us. It was Grant. He looked shaken, haunted really but determined. "Naomi," he said. "Darren, I owe you both. I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up when it counted," I replied. "You gave the truth a voice when everyone else was whispering lies." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll give my full statement to the police. And I'll testify, if it goes to trial." Simone's plan, it was hers from the beginning. But Vivian knew. She encouraged it. She even offered to help file the insurance paperwork after the wedding. Said it would clean up nicely. Darren looked stunned, but not surprised. "Thank you," he said. "Really." As Grant walked back inside, the weight of generations of Halston arrogance seemed to fall away behind him. We drove straight to the hospital. Eli was treated, stitched, and monitored overnight. The staff was kind, and they made sure he felt safe. When we were finally discharged, it was nearly dawn. Ravenshore's streets were quiet again, as if the city itself needed rest. At home, I tucked Eli into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You are the bravest person I know." His hand gripped mine. I didn't do anything brave. You told the truth, I said. And you held your head high. That's more than most people ever do. Darren stood in the doorway watching us. His eyes were red, his shoulders finally sagging with the guilt and pain he had held in for too long. That night, we didn't talk about Vivian, or Simone, or the Halston name. We talked about healing, and what would come next. The following morning, we were contacted by Detective Brandt, who confirmed both women were being formally charged. He asked if we were willing to press charges. Yes, I said without hesitation. For the assault, the false accusation, all of it. He nodded through the phone. We have surveillance footage, witness statements, and financial evidence. This case is moving quickly. A public trial is almost inevitable. I glanced at Eli, who was quietly sketching in his notebook on the couch. Let them go public. Let people see who they really are. Because the world had watched me and my son be humiliated. Now it was going to watch us rise. The courtroom smelled of old leather and varnish, formal, heavy, and unfeeling. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Local journalists, former Halston business partners, neighbors who used to fawn over Vivian's garden parties now leaned in, waiting to watch her fall. I sat in the front row between Darren and Eli. My son's stitches had healed, but a faint scar remained above his right eyebrow. He wasn't hiding behind me anymore. He sat upright, chin raised, his fingers laced calmly in his lap. At 13, he looked older than his years, and far wiser. Across the aisle, Simone sat at the defendant's table, wrists cuffed, face pale and hardened. Gone were the flawless makeup and high-end designer clothes. In their place was a plain suit and a look of deep resentment. Next to her, Vivian Halston sat stiffly, her expression unreadable, as though she still believed this courtroom would recognize her power. They were wrong. Judge Clarice Harlow, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for integrity, entered the courtroom. We all rose as she took her seat. And then the trial began. The prosecution presented everything. The security footage showing Simone taking the necklace and staging the scream. Testimony from Grant, who confirmed the plan was premeditated and motivated by Simone's debt. A report from the insurance fraud investigator, confirming a pending claim had already been prepared by Simone. And then, my own testimony describing the moment Simone struck my son and the trauma that followed. When it was Darren's turn, he didn't hold back. I was raised in a house where image mattered more than people, he said. But I've learned the hard way that protecting image at the cost of truth destroys everything. Judge Harlow listened closely. When asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Simone stood with a huff. "This is all ridiculous," she said. "It was a misunderstanding. I panicked. I thought he took it and I reacted." She turned toward us and sneered. "You people were never part of this family." Judge Harlow didn't flinch. "Miss Halston," she said calmly, "you lied, committed fraud, framed a child, and committed assault in front of dozens of witnesses. Your lack of remorse is staggering." Then she read the sentence. 6 years in state prison for felony assault, fraud, and defamation. A $200,000 restitution fine, a majority of which would go directly to Eli as compensation. Seizure of luxury assets, including Simone's car, jewelry, and condo. Simone screamed as the bailiff took her by the arm. "Emma, say something." But Vivian said nothing. Her jaw was tight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Then came her turn. The prosecution revealed years of hidden offshore accounts, false tax returns, and evidence of aiding Simone's insurance scheme. A former accountant turned whistleblower testified against her, providing damning details of how Vivian manipulated paperwork and intimidated employees. When asked for her statement, Vivian stood proudly and said, "Everything I did was to protect our legacy." Judge Harlow replied, "Your legacy has done more harm than good. And now you will answer for it." Sentence: 8 years in federal prison. Complete forfeiture of the Halston estate and its holdings. Permanent ban from serving on any charity boards, financial committees, or public institutions. As the gavel came down, A collective breath filled the courtroom. The Halstons, once untouchable, had finally met the law. As Vivian was escorted past me, she met my gaze for a single moment, and then she looked away. In the weeks following the sentencing, Ravenshore buzzed with headlines. The Halston family, once hailed as a symbol of refinement and elite status, had become synonymous with scandal, fraud, and cruelty. Every major news outlet ran the story. From pedestals to prison, the fall of the Halstons. Teen framed in $150,000 heirloom fraud, justice prevails. Vivian Halston sentenced, legacy crumbles under lies. People who once begged for invitations to their events now scrubbed their social media of any association. The Halston mansion sat behind locked gates, its garden overgrown, its legacy lost to dust and disgrace. Meanwhile, our world, the one that had been so quiet, so humble, began to blossom in ways I hadn't imagined. Darren took extended leave from his engineering firm. He didn't need to say it. I knew he was making up for years of silence, absence, and fear of confronting his family. He cooked breakfast every morning, helped Eli with science projects, took him hiking, and even repaired a broken model airplane they'd abandoned months earlier. We weren't perfect, but for the first time, we were present for each other. Eli, my brave, brilliant boy, changed too. He walked taller, spoke louder. The scar on his forehead became a quiet badge of truth, not something to hide, but something to own. And one sunny afternoon, I returned to my work at the Ravenshore Historical Museum. As I stepped into the children's exhibit, where I'd hosted storytelling sessions for years, I spotted a familiar figure arranging a stack of books on a reading stool. Eli. He turned when he heard me. Mom, can I read the story today? I blinked. You want to read to the kids? He nodded.
Yeah.
I picked the right one. I stepped aside, letting him sit on the small wooden stool in the center of the circle. A group of young children gathered around, wide-eyed and eager. Eli opened the picture book, smiled, and cleared his throat. Today's story, he said, is called The Truth Always Comes Out. His voice was strong, steady, and full of quiet power. I stood by the museum doorway, arms crossed, my heart swelling. The sun streamed in through tall windows, casting a warm glow over him and the children. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but not from sadness. From pride. That necklace, the one Vivian and Simone used to try to destroy us, was long gone now. Sold to repay debt. Seized by the courts. Erased from their story. But what remained?
Us. We weren't wealthy.
We weren't glamorous. We didn't host charity galas or appear on magazine covers. But we had something far more rare. Integrity. Courage.
Truth.
And that, after everything, was more than enough. Thank you for reading our story. If it moved you, inspired you, or made you think, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. We share real-life inspired stories every week, stories that show how truth, even when buried, always finds the light. Your support helps us keep these voices alive.